repetition in this lab, things we've done before. And when we're done, we'll have a nice little package to choose from for the lab midterm. And, okay, so we've seen this. These kind of shows what happens. There's the optic chiasma right above the cella turcica, correct? That's the pituitary down there. And this is the semilunar ganglion and the three branches of the trigeminal nerve, V1, V2, and V3. Remember all that stuff? And we'll be talking about that again. And V1 exits through the supraorbital fissure. V2 exits through the foramen rotundum. The maxillary branch, the mandibular branch exits through the what? Foramen ovale, good. This is sort of a weird picture. The mandibular branch actually branches into two sub-branches, and this is the alveolar branch that innervates your lower teeth, and the lingual branch, which innervates the tongue region. That is a really bizarre picture. And this shows kind of the same thing, the alveolar branch. Alveolar means teeth, okay? And the lingual branch. So inferior alveolar nerve, there you see it. So, and I only have this on pictures. And there are those again. Okay, 5 branches of the facial nerve. There they are on another picture. And another picture. And our model, that half head, has the temporal, the buccal, and the mandibular, doesn't it? So, the only cranial nerve to exit the head is the vagus nerve, isn't it? And that's mentioned specifically, and we'll be talking about that in class next Monday. Okay, and the hypoglossal nerve is mostly motor, exits through the hypoglossal canal and controls the tongue in speech and chewing. Okay, brachial plexus gives rise to some nerves we'll be learning today: musculocutaneous, axillary, radial, median, and ulnar. Those are all lab words for today. Are the 5 branches that come out of the brachial plexus. Okay, and the musculocutaneous nerve innervates sort of the upper arm region. Okay. So there you see it. And these all show up nicely on our models to a greater or lesser degree. The ulnar nerve isn't on your lab, and it should be. So this will be a word we will add to our lab. Okay. And if falx cerebri really isn't on the last lab, consider it added. I believe you guys, I'm not disputing that. It wasn't even on that list at the end. Huh. Okay, the median nerve basically gets its name from its position in the forearm. It's in between the radial and the ulnar nerve. Okay, and the radial nerve disappears way in the upper arm, never to be seen again until it gets clear down to the thumb. Okay, at least not on our model. So it dives deep and runs in between muscles very deeply out into the thumb region of the hand. see this is upper arm and it just disappears. Okay, nerves of the posterior leg. The largest nerve in the body comes out of the sacral plexus. It is the sciatic nerve. And in the lower thigh, it bifurcates into the common peroneal nerve, shown nicely on our model, and the tibial nerve. And the tibial nerve is really the major nerve of the lower leg. Okay. And the common, anytime you see the word common attached to the name of something, it usually means it's going to bifurcate fairly soon into two other smaller structures, usually which have the same name, but not always. In this case, this bifurcates into the deep peroneal nerve and the superficial peroneal nerve, both shown nicely on our model. Okay. And so you could see the deep peroneal nerve runs fairly deeply in the anterior shin region. The shin really has more muscles than you would think. Feels kind of bony and empty, but boy, that's a lot of muscles in there, as you may recall. Okay, and we have the femoral nerve, or femoral, however you choose to pronounce it, branches into a sensory branch called the saphenous nerve, which runs superficially along the medial thigh, all the way down to the bottom of the leg, and a motor branch, which remains fairly deep, and those are both lab words. Okay. The lumbar plexus, up in the lumbar region, okay, and L5 is called the lumbosacral trunk, and because it connects the lumbar plexus to the sacral plexus. Okay, L5, and it shows up nicely. The lumbosacral trunk shows up on our model. So the eye. Okay, and we just finished talking about that. So let's see here. The extrinsic muscles which control eye movement, there are 6 of them. The superior, inferior, medial, and lateral rectus muscles. The superior oblique muscle and the inferior oblique muscle. Okay. And I just think that I probably will have to show you pictures if I ask those. Although they do show up nicely on a model, I think. Yeah. What am I thinking about? We have the 3 tunics of the eye: the fibrous tunic, the vascular tunic, and the nervous tunic. And all 3 of those show up on our model. Okay. The vascular tunic consists of 3 parts. This may even be a quiz question in lecture. There are 3 parts to the vascular tunic: the choroid, that black membrane, and the iris, and the ciliary body contains the muscles and the little suspensory ligaments that control the thickness of the lens. So that's the ciliary body, the iris, and all the rest of it is the choroid. And of course, we talked about how this works. Okay. And you guys seem to have pretty good command of that on the quiz. So, the retina, the optic disc, the optic nerve, and the fovea centralis are all lab words. The optic disc is completely occupied by axons and blood vessels, so there's no room for any photoreceptors. So that's why it's sometimes called the blind spot. Okay. The fovea centralis is where the image is focused. If you go straight back through the pupil, the image is focused on the fovea centralis. And what type of photoreceptor is primarily found in the fovea centralis? Cones, yeah. The region around the fovea centralis is called the macula lutea, and you've heard of macular degeneration. I wonder if, I don't think, that's not a lab word. Wonder if our model shows that. The crystalline lens, and the anterior cavity is everything in front of the lens, and that contains aqueous humor. The posterior cavity is everything behind the lens, and that contains vitreous humor. Okay, the ear. So we've got the auditory canal and the tympanic membrane and the malleus, incus, and stapes. There aren't really that many lab words for ear. Let's get to some bigger pictures here. Okay. So malleus attaches to the tympanic membrane, incus, now this is all malleus, incus, and stapes. The stapes attaches to the oval window, which you cannot see because it's covered up by the stapes. But we have the round window, which vibrates. It contains a little membrane, sort of that secondary tympanic membrane that we talked about in class. So if this stapes is vibrating the fluid in there at 17,000 cycles per second, then this little membrane is vibrating at 17,000 cycles per second, because water is an incompressible fluid. Okay, eustachian tube, I forget if that's a lab word or not. Should be. Collapsible tube. Okay. If I ask you anything about the organ of Corti, I'll have to ask it off this picture. We don't have any models that show a large version of the organ of Corti. This is the cochlear duct, okay, or the membranous labyrinth, as it is called. This is the basilar membrane, and this entire structure here is called the organ of Corti and runs the entire length of the cochlea. We're just looking at one little axial slice that we've sliced through. And there's another picture, oval window, round window. Scala tympani and scala vestibuli. The scala vestibuli is the smaller one of the two scalas. That's how you can recognize it. And the cochlear duct is the smallest one of the three. And you can actually take our little cochlea apart, and I think it shows enough detail to see the scala tympani and scala vestibuli. The scala vestibuli is the smaller one. Okay. You look at the semicircular canal, and at the base of each one there's a swollen part, and that's the ampulla, and that is where the crista are. Remember, inside those, and those are the organs of dynamic equilibrium. Ampulla. And all this is contained inside the petrous ridge of the temporal bone. Okay, but we don't care about auditory wiring or, okay, so what nerve are we really looking at here?
Trigeminal.
Okay, trigeminal, okay, the three branches of the trigeminal nerve, and of course, we put, if we're talking about a branch, if we're talking about the ophthalmic branch, we always put V1 along with it, and if we're talking about the maxillary branch, we always put a V2 along with it. Mandibular branch is V3. Okay, so I wonder what I wanted you to name here. How about naming this little bone? Stapes. Okay, and how about this part here? cochlea. Okay, so what substance do we find in here?
Vitreous humor.
Vitreous humor. How about there?
Aqueous humor.
Aqueous humor. So what's that structure right there? Iris. Okay. So what's the little swollen place there? Ampulla. Okay. And of course with this great big part here is called the vestibule and the semicircular canal. Cochlea coiled up. Cochlea means snail shell. Okay, and anyone remember what that nerve is?
Mandibular.
Hypoglossal.
Hypoglossal.
Okay, what's this structure here? Organ of Corti. How about that little membrane? Basilar membrane. Okay, how about that? Vermis of the cerebellum. Okay, what's the connective tissue structure that anchors the cord? Phylum terminale. Yeah. How about this? Bulk cerebri. Okay. How about those bumps?
Corpora
Corpora quadrigemina. Okay. How about that little membrane? Septum pellucidum. How about that little thing?
Arachnoid villi.
Arachnoid villus. How about that? Choroid plexus. How about that? Midbrain, Mickey Mouse. Yep. Okay, so let's